The Nigerian government has made its strategic security intention for the next 5 years public. This new national security strategy is coming 5 years after the maiden edition. Though protecting the Nigerian people and its territory is still first on the list of priorities of the government, the economic dimension to security has been given a bigger role. Now, government's new strategy includes higher quality education, lowering illiteracy rates and creating an environment that promotes more jobs. But how much progress did the maiden edition of the National Security Strategy achieve, and what makes this document different? Well, to analyze this with me tonight is Mr. Babajide Ogunsowo, Channels Television's data and information consultant. Glad to have you on the program.
Good evening, Millicent.
All right, good evening. Just before we discuss the new national security strategy, how much has been achieved since its maiden edition in 2014?
There are three ways to look at what has been achieved between 2014 and date. The first is half a decade ago, the Global Database of Terrorism, which is the most reliable source that tracks the reports on terrorism, states that as of 2014, Nigeria had its worst number of terrorist attacks in history. There were 714 terrorist attacks in 2014. That's the first thing you need to know. The second is, let's take a careful look at what has happened between 2014 and 2019. And if we take a careful look at that report, the number of terrorist attacks in Nigeria, the evidence shows it was declining before last year. Here's what I mean. In 2014, there were 714 terrorist attacks. The evidence shows from the Global Database of Terrorism that we've seen three consecutive years of decline in the rate of terrorist attacks. There was a decline in 2015, another decline in 2016, and 2017 was the best year in terms of terrorist attacks for the government. That was the lowest rate in 2017. However, we've seen a rise based on the report from the Global Database of Terrorism. They state that 2018, there were 645 terrorist attacks in the country. And so what does this mean? It means that we've seen 3 years of consecutive decline in the rate of terrorism, but what it also tells us is that last year, the terrorists changed their tactics and strategy. And that brings me to the final point. What advantage do the terrorists have? The advantage they have is whenever they change their tactics and strategy, they don't make their document public. The disadvantage we have is we are following the United States model. We have a security strategy that makes and goes into the public space. Let me make myself a bit clearer. Let's take a case of Dangote. Dangote has a plan. Oh yes, at the end of every year, the company releases its financial report. But Mr. Dangote would never want his 5-year business plan to be in the hands of his competitors. Neither will he want his strategic documents to be held or to be seen by any competitor. So we need to consider...
Are we at a risk by making our strategy public? What do you think the priorities for the new security strategy should be?
Sometimes with security, silence is golden. Yes, it is important to release, it will be better to release the results of our security progress, but whenever we release any report on strategy, we need to be careful that we do not provide too much information, because let's not be deceived. The terrorists right now will have a copy of our strategic intentions for the next 5 years, and they will be studying it closely. But for Nigerians, what you talked about is, what does the summary of this report state? Let's not talk too much about it. And if we take a careful look at the report, there are 4 things that the government says will be priority. The first, preserving Nigerians and protecting its borders. That is the first thing that the government says it will do. The second in the 5-year plan is promoting Nigeria's prosperity and sustainable development. What the government is talking about by that is that there will be a better coordination of economic factors to be able to use to improve security. And third, the government says national unity and peaceful coexistence is among those 4 priorities. So clearly, the considerations on all things that need to be done to ensure that there's peace and coexistence is part of the next 5-year strategy. And finally, protecting our regional and international interests. And that summarizes what is in that document without providing too much information to the those that we're competing against, because clearly security in Nigeria and security globally is now a competition, and we must be careful that we don't provide too much information to those that we are fighting.
Okay, so I have two questions. Which do you think the government is working at? Which do you think Nigerians are seeing in terms of the four that you've listed? And the second question is, how do we evolve from what's on paper as a document to a strategy that we can implement that could work, that would work?
I'd like to start with the second one, because a lot of Nigerians are asking, we've seen a lot of reports, but how do we convert strategic documents to implementation? And there are key players, and I'd like us to also look at those key players that have developed this document, and then we'll look at the top 3 people that will be really involved in the implementation of this report. And what do I mean by the key players? Clearly, we have people that we call the strategists and the tacticians. And if we take a look at that, we'll see that the National Security Council, key members of the National Security Council, yes, played a big role in strategizing to be able to have the direction for the next 5 years. And by that, we're looking at the president, the vice president, the chief of defense staff, the chief of army staff, all the service chiefs, the interior minister. We also look at the role played by the exterior minister, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also the chief of air staff. But beyond the strategists, there are 3 men that would be implementing the strategic vision for the next 5 years: the National Security Advisor, the Inspector General of Police, and the Chief of Defense Intelligence, Air Vice Marshal Usman. And the reason why him in particular is important is because based on this document, the next 4-5 years, the security architecture is going to be information-driven. So we are moving from kinetic warfare to an information-driven solution. So yes, we've seen the men that have prepared the strategy for this, but implementation based on what you've said will really be led by these 3 men. But we also will wait to see what decisions the president will take about those positions. Will they be the ones to run it all through, or will there be any change in the near future? We cannot speculate about that. But clearly what we've seen is these were the men that were in position when the rate of terrorism declined. However, we've seen an upsurge because the terrorists have changed their tactics and strategy, and we need to keep more information to ourselves and make sure that the terrorists don't have all the information, and the kidnappers as well don't have all the information that we're pushing out.
All right, I've just been told that it's time for a break, but I'd like to thank you.
But in the final words, security for the next 5 years, silence is golden.
Thank you very much, Babajide Ogunsowo, for talking to us.
The pleasure is all mine, Millicent.